Hello, everyone, and welcome on into week one of the college football betting preview. Myself, Joe Tansey, Ryan Beef Coyle, Mark Henry Jr. here every Tuesday night to give you the best looks at the college football betting board. Boys, it's just nice to have college football back in our lives, and let's just dive right into it. Florida State, what happened?
DJ's what happened. That was I thought from that first drive that, that Florida State was going to kind of have their way with them up front at the line of scrimmage. And I think they kind of got a stern talking to on the sideline because from after that, Georgia Tech dominated the line of scrimmage. DJ didn't really show any ability to kind of push the ball downfield. He did have that nice drive to tie the game up. That was a pretty impressive drive, those two big fourth downs over the middle. But outside of that, that passing game was real pedestrian, not really striking fear to many teams. And I think, future teams are kind of licking their chops saying we can load the box against this Florida State team and try to make DJU beat us. But that Georgia Tech team's we talked about it. It's going to be a frisky squad this year. I'm not necessarily predicting them to be an 8-9 win team, but that looks like a team that definitely will be bowling. And I expect to have, another upset or two like that over the course of the season.
So from a betting perspective now, so Florida State was a top 10 preseason team. That's obviously going to change going into week 2 when the new rankings come out. So how do we approach Florida State now? They play Monday night against Boston College, so plenty of time to kind of get motivated again for another conference game too, which is very weird to start the season in this climate. So Mark, how do we approach betting Florida State? Do we go of, is it DJU? We're fading until proven otherwise. Is it something else? What do you have to see out of Florida State to trust them from a betting perspective?
Well, I think the beautiful thing about college football is that there's how many teams in the Division One? What's that number at?
34.
134. I couldn't recall the exact number. We don't have to bet every team. You know what I mean? Like I think we can do a wait and see approach now with Florida State to see, because I think everyone wants to diagnose exactly what happened with Florida State and Georgia Tech. What I would say is that it's probably a little bit of Florida State's worse than we think and Georgia Tech's better than we think. It's probably not an absolute either way. So I think it's probably worth waiting because there's a world. I mean, they looked bad enough offensively that you could be convinced that they're a 7-win team, but there's also a world where they get right and get back on track and get to, 9-win team probably. So I think it's one of those things where you watch that Florida State Boston College game and wait and see. That is a standalone, right? Florida State Boston College.
Yeah,
so I know that's a little bit harder then to wait and see on a standalone game. But that would be kind of my angle there.
Is there anything from maybe a totals perspective? The over-under is 50, spreads 15. Kind of jumping into it real quick, but because it's Florida State and they just lost and they're fresh in everybody's mind, do we even touch them until we see what they can do on American soil?
I did see his stats. It was something about the possessions. There was only 14 possessions in that game. It had been how long since that? This is bad job by me to not have the exact stat ready, but I know it was like maybe like a decade since there's been a game with that few possessions in a game. So it's just one of those things where Georgia Tech came into the game with a ball control strategy, and it worked better than any strategy that has ever worked in any football game. I mean, limiting the possessions to that level is pretty crazy. So there's probably some unrepeatable stuff there on both ends. With Florida State will probably get more possessions on offense to get right, and Georgia Tech will probably not be able to run for the exact amount of yards that they needed on third down every time. So,
although BC Thomas Castellanos,
yes,
I mean, they could put together a few 10-minute drives if they're somewhat competent on offense. Worth seeing for sure, though.
That's the interesting. Bill O'Brien being the new coach there, it's really going to be interesting to see if he tries to do the classic, like, I got to have my mobile quarterback learn how to throw, or if he's just going to unleash Castellanos and let him run all over the yard. It'll be interesting.
Kind of a learning experience for all of us on those Monday night games, or that Monday night game. Let's get right into it. We've got a nice little Saturday slate, a beautiful Sunday game, in my opinion, which I think we're a house divided on. So let's get right into the big games for week 1. Clemson and Georgia is the first one on our screens. Look, it's a home game for Georgia. It's in Atlanta. It's not a neutral site. We all know this by now. You have Notre Dame at Texas A&M. Very big test for the Irish, a top 10 team, playoff hopeful, and Texas A&M trying to figure out what they are post Jimbo with Mike Elko, their new head coach. I would assume defense first, and then LSU, USC. That's got a lot of intrigue because we just don't know what those two teams are like. If this was 12 months ago, I'd say hammer the over and sit back and watch. But both teams have improved their defense, hired new defensive coordinators. So we'll see how that goes. But let's get right into it. Clemson and Georgia, the number one team in the country, testing themselves right off the bat against Clemson. I think we know what Georgia is, right, guys? What is Clemson going to be like in 2024? And are they a little extra motivated knowing that the ACC might be theirs for the taking?
I think Beef and I are kind of on the same page. I'll let Beef lead off here.
Yeah, I do think Clemson is their kind of championship era is going past them a little bit. As the summer went on, though, the more and more kind of stuff that I started listening to, though, a lot of people out there believing in kind of Klubnik, Garrett Riley year 2 leap. I'm not necessarily on that train. He just wasn't a very impressive quarterback in my eyes last year. I think the defense is going to be really good. I think the defense will keep him in a lot of games. And I still think that's a 9-10 win team potentially. But at Clemson, I think it's kind of like what Villanova has morphed into, where it's like you were a national championship basketball program. That was the expectation, Final Four. Now it's just like, oh, if you're Villanova, let's just make the tournament. Clemson, it's like, oh, as long as we, just make the playoff, that's fine. No, like the expectation was kind of born and bred there that this is a national championship program, and I think that has passed them. So the ACC being weak, Florida State going into the season as the favorite, they're now all the way down to plus 600, as we were just talking about, to win the conference. The door is open for Clemson to kind of go through and make some noise, but I also think this is a terrible kind of week 1 game to get off on your schedule, because Georgia could go out there and blow you out of the water by 3 touchdowns, and there everyone's already writing you off before September even begins.
Do you guys? So there's 4 teams that did not take a transfer in the transfer portal. I think Beef knows the stat. Do you know who the 4 teams are, Joe Tansey?
Clemson's definitely one of them if you're teeing me up here.
Clemson's one of them. Who would the other 3 be?
I would have no idea. Give me the other 3.
Army, Navy, and Air Force. Clemson's the only team in the country that didn't have to that didn't take a transfer, that didn't have to get a congressman to get it in to be a transfer. But Clemson's only returning half their starters, and they didn't take any transfers. I get that they recruited a high level. I just don't think what we've seen over this last couple of years is a blip in the radar. Like I think this is a downward trajectory of the Clemson program, and I don't see it plateauing or getting better, to be quite honest. I think it's going to continue going down as Dabo continues to be more stuck in his ways about anti-transfer portal and NIL. And I think the reason that I didn't talk much about Florida State and how wrong I was about Florida State. I think the reason that I've been soft on DJU and haven't been as critical as everybody else is because I think Cade Klubnik gets none of the criticism DJU got 2 years ago in Clemson, and people are just ready for Cade Klubnik to be good all of a sudden. I think that guy stinks. I really don't get the Cade Klubnik thing. He had 2,800 yards last year, 19 touchdowns, 9 picks. Like, I think he is like the definition of just a guy. I don't see it with him. And then you look at the other side of the football. Beef can't believe that I have Georgia going undefeated with that schedule, but I do. I think they're the best team in the country, and I think Carson Beck is the best quarterback in the country. I think Kirby Smart is the best coach in the country. Like I don't have any questions about Georgia, and I feel like I've got only questions about Clemson. So I get it. People love Clemson. People love the recruiting. I think it's just being a little bit too loyal to the 5 stars.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about Carson Beck for a second, because some people may say, oh, he's the quarterback of the number 1 team in college football, the team that a lot of people think could go undefeated this year. So that's why he's the Heisman Trophy winner, or the presumptive favorite, at least. What is it about Carson Beck that I guess is taking this program to another level? Why is he not Stetson Bennett, or is he? Like, what are we expecting from Carson Beck to lead this Georgia program? Because the mock drafts love him. He's very high up on the Heisman odds. So what is it about Carson Beck that's going to make this team essentially be the number 1 team in the country all throughout the season based off of what a lot of people are saying.
He just has everything you want in a pro style quarterback at this point. The size and he takes the chances down the field that maybe Stetson didn't take all the time and wasn't really asked to take. Like Stetson, and Stetson won, was it 2 championships with Georgia? Mm-hmm. So I'm not trying to put down Stetson Bennett, but I do just think that it was a different offense, and they were throwing intermediate routes to McConkey and to Bowers so often. Whereas last year you saw Beck get guys like Lovett and Rosemary Jackson down the field. And I think that that's going to be more of what we see this year with some of the transfers that they brought in as well. And ETN in the backfield can catch passes as well now, transferring in from it was Florida, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that it's a lot about what's around him as well, obviously, because you have an embarrassment of riches with Georgia, because not only does Georgia recruit at the same level that Clemson does, if not probably definitely higher, they also use the transfer portal. So Kirby Smart is not stuck in his ways and not using the transfer portal. So he's getting kind of the best of both worlds there. But I think Carson Beck, you look at the stats last year, he had close to 4,000 yards, 24 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions. So it feels like he's able to take those chances, and the yards per attempt and the ADOT is, up down the field without really turning the ball over too much. Whereas a guy like Klubnik fumbles not even picks, he fumbles all over the place. Clemson had the 3rd most fumbles in college football last year. So I think a lot of this game is going to come down to turnovers, and I think give me Georgia's defense in that scenario.
So Georgia's, go ahead.
I think Beck completed 72.6% of his passes last year, I believe was the number. So extremely efficient. And I think also kind of just like putting it really simple, just looking at the two side by side, it's like Stetson Bennett didn't really look like he belonged out there. Carson Beck has, the pro style kind of frame and everything, 6'4". So I think he gets a little bit more, benefit of the doubt in that type of scenario as well, that people can kind of buy into that, because Stetson was really just a glorified game manager. He glorified game managed his way to 2 national championships, but then we saw what he did in the preseason, that one game, 4 interceptions. So, 2 completely different kind of players. Beck kind of gives them probably a little bit of a higher ceiling, but you look at the biggest game last year, didn't really show up against Alabama. So Stetson played well kind of under the pressure. So that's something I think to take into consideration as well, because that Georgia team didn't really have many close games, and then you play a tough team in Alabama down the stretch. You're not used to playing close games. It's a completely different thing if you're not being able to kind of run the ball the entire second half pretty much.
A fun stat that I found here, and I knew it was out there somewhere. Carson Beck gets rid of the ball incredibly fast, and that's, you have a great offensive line, so sometimes he's able to hold it, but Beck's average time to throw in 2023 was 2.22 seconds, was the fastest of any Power 5 starter with 300 plus dropbacks. And in the times he threw it under 2.5 seconds, he was 208 for 259 for an 81% completion percentage. He had 2,100 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 1 pick on those throws. So he's able to diagnose a play right at the line of scrimmage.
So it sounds like both of you are on Georgia then with the 13.5. I think I'm going to probably go that way as well. But what about the total? Because the last time these two opened the season, I believe it was 10-3 a few years ago. Very, very ugly type game. And that was the start of the kind of downfall of Clemson. The over-under is 48.5. If we think Clemson is meh offensively, but Georgia is going to carry this game, is it Georgia's defense that determines the total in this game then?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you're talking about the 2021 game with Clemson. This actually reminds me more of the opening season of 2022 with Georgia when they had Oregon come to Atlanta and they just laid the absolute smackdown on them. And I think that's what's going to happen again. Maybe not 49-3 like they did with Dan Lanning's first year in Oregon, but I would maybe take a look at I'm seeing the team total over here for Georgia's 30.5. I would maybe take a look at that, but even that, there's a scenario where this is a 28-10 game, 28-13. So I would probably stay away from the total. I think anything I would look to put on the total, I would just back up and take on Georgia minus 13. I think it's my favorite play of the week. I haven't locked in any plays yet. I'm leaning towards Georgia being my best bet.
Real quick on the Georgia defense. So if we think that the Georgia defense is pretty strong, do we look at a team total under on Clemson? Because I believe the number is hovering around 17.5. it feels like it's a lot for Clemson to do against Georgia's defense at least in the regard that we're talking about them in. Look, I don't want to say we have like 5 plays in this game. I'm keeping it simple and going with Georgia. But when it comes to maybe betting aside on this game, do you look at maybe a team total under on Clemson just because we, at least on paper, Georgia's defense spectacular?
Yeah, I would probably lean in that direction more so than the total game under, because I do think Georgia, could have a scenario where they do put up some points themselves. And Mark was saying with the turnovers last year for Clemson, I believe they turned it over 22 times. 13 of those were fumbles, and then nine were picked from Klubnik. So you have to assume ball security was a major emphasis this offseason at Clemson. But the first game, it's not the easiest opponent to be practicing ball security against. These are the biggest, fastest players you probably will see the entire season. So I don't trust Cade Klubnik in this spot. If I am going to make a play on it, it's probably going to be that 13.5. But I do think the team total under could be in the cards as well, because my prediction probably more so like a 27-10 type game, and you're going under there for sure with that Clemson team total.
So let's go on to a game I think someone in this little triumvirate here is a little more passionate about.
Yeah, you know what? I just want to real quick get this off my chest. It's absolute BS that we do these college football pods with 3 agnostic fans who don't have a team to live and die with. I'm the only idiot that has their team public, and everyone gets to make fun of me and ridicule me if I'm biased or if a team loses. Beef is like, oh, I'm a Nebraska fan. We'll see how long that sticks. Tansey's a Penn State fan when it's convenient. And then he rips on them when they lose. No. I understand.
I'm through marriage, but through my wallet.
And then I don't know where Sean. Yeah, that's true. I hear that. And then I don't know where Sean Brace is coming or going. I'm the only.
Sean Brace doesn't know where he's coming or going sometimes. Let's be completely honest here. I mean, welcome to being a college football fan in the Northeast. That's you're either a Notre Dame fan, a Penn State fan, or you're an Eagles fan or gambler. Yeah. So Notre Dame at Texas A&M. I was very adamant weeks ago. I'm taking the under in this game. I know the totals dropped a little bit. Here's what I look at it. Mike Elko is a defensive-minded coach. If the offense doesn't come together in week 1 for Texas A&M, the defense damn better come together. He's also facing a quarterback in Riley Leonard, who he knows every little detail of what he does well from their time at Duke. I think that's a little bit of an X factor, at least when you look at it's kind of a clean slate with Riley Leonard leading the Notre Dame offense. Texas A&M very clearly a clean slate under Mike Elko. So we don't have a ton to go off of here, but I do know Mike Elko is a defensive-minded guy. I think he's going to make this a grind. And I'm not convinced that Riley Leonard's going to go out here and put up 25, 30 points on the road in his first game as Notre Dame's starting quarterback. Look, the transfer thing worked, but or they tried to let it work at Notre Dame last year. But did Sam Hartman blow anybody away? I'm not going to sit here and say he did. He was solid. But, I mean, what else are you getting out of Riley Leonard that you didn't get out of Sam Hartman is what I'm trying to get at here with Notre Dame. Yeah. It's fascinating to me, though, Notre Dame opening on the road in College Station. I feel like there's a lot of variables here. I'm very sternly on this. It's going to be like a 17-10 type game. It's going to be ugly, one in the trenches. But I think you guys both have 2 different sides on this game.
Well, the difference with Sam Hartman and Riley Leonard is Mike Denbrock. He was the offensive coordinator for LSU last year when Jaden Daniels went out and won the Heisman and got 3 receivers drafted or 2 receivers drafted in the first round, excuse me. So I think that's the massive difference. I think if Sam Hartman transferred into an offensive coordinator that wasn't a tight ends coach the year before. Gerard Parker was an absolute moron. His play calling last year was maddening. I was having to watch Gerard Parker on Saturdays and Brian Johnson on Sundays. It was an absolute nightmare of a football season for me from a fan perspective. But I think Mike Denbrock is going to change everything. He's been at Notre Dame before. The offenses were really good when he was at Notre Dame, and they took a dip last year, obviously, because they were pretty good with Reese in the in-between times when he was the offensive coordinator. He went to Alabama last year. I actually don't know where Tommy Reese is now.
He's the tight ends coach and assistant head coach for the Browns, I believe.
He's somewhere in the NFL, yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that, actually. But yeah, I think that I'm obviously higher on Notre Dame than most. What I will say is this is their toughest game of the year. I think it's the only game this year that they'll be an underdog in. So I understand why people are picking Texas A&M. I do think it's very funny that everyone is talking about like, oh, Notre Dame's going to lose a big game again, and they're going to let everyone down. It's like, are we aware of who Texas A&M is? Like, right. They are the perennial preseason let you down team that Desmond Howard picks to win the national championship and go to the playoff every year. Like, they are Texas A&M. I don't know. And people think a new coach is going to fix that. Mike Elko's not coming in with like 3 championships. He coached at Duke. He was fine. I think that a lot of it was because he had a really good quarterback at Duke.
They went with a familiar face because he was there before under Jimbo, before he left to Duke. I think that's what they ended up doing. We want a familiar face. We just spent oodles and oodles of oil money on Jimbo Fisher's buyout. Let's bring in somebody who, at minimum, will win us 7 to 8 games.
Well, they wanted to hire Mark Stoops, and their fan base outraged.
Oh yeah.
Their fan base did not allow them to hire Mark Stoops, so then they landed on Mike Elko,
which is wild to me. Like looking back on it, because look, we can judge these things. I mean, look at Tennessee when they didn't want Chiano.
Yeah, well, I guess they ended up working out.
It ended up working, but I mean, you never know, right? It's kind of like a sliding doors moment of, well, we're going to hire Mark Stoops, but everybody's so against it. Who knows? You really don't know. I think he's a phenomenal college football coach with what he's gotten out of Kentucky. But, I mean, the expectations rise when you go to Texas A&M, right?
But Elko's not getting any of that. Like, oh, this is a big step for Elko because he was at Texas A&M before.
Because he was there, yeah.
Coordinator. It's different though. Like him stepping into the head coach role is a big change, and I think people are just assuming Connor Wegman's going to take this jump. I would much rather bet on Riley Leonard to take the jump, getting to an offensive coordinator who helped the guy win the Heisman last year.
I think it's very. What do the kids call it? Mid.
Yeah,
I think it's very mid versus mid in this quarterback battle.
I definitely think that's crazy. I think Riley Leonard is undoubtedly a top 15 quarterback in the country.
What about Wegman?
Wegman's top 20. Top 25, I think. I would definitely prefer Riley Leonard. I mean, Riley Leonard's like a projected NFL draft pick next year, like a day 2, maybe day 3 guy. So me saying, like, I think mid is crazy. There's 134 college programs. He was like the second highest transfer ranked last year. Like I don't think that Riley Leonard is mid by any definition, but I think that he's going to definitely improve here. I don't know if it's going to be a high scoring game. I think it's probably going to be a close game. I would guess like 23-20, 24-21. So that would go right under. What's that? 48 and a half.
I think it's at 46 and a half.
He's down to 46 now.
I think that's a good number. But yeah, I'm not too passionate about a side. I would lean Notre Dame +3. I would say that I think that there's a lot of people making the Charles Jagasa injury into why that line is moving. Notre Dame is so deep on the offensive line with high.
They've always been a very good offensive line program, regardless of who's been their coach.
Yeah, they're so deep on the offensive line. It would have made me much more nervous if a worse player got hurt, and maybe in the secondary or in the receiver, places that I don't think they're as deep. But I think you're actually getting maybe a bit of a discount because of that line movement. That injury doesn't really concern me for this game. I don't think we're going to walk out of this game being like, oh, Notre Dame just couldn't block them. That's generally not what happens. I think there's a chance you walk out of the game and saying, man, Notre Dame still hasn't figured out at the wide receiver position. The writers this offseason are saying they love what they're seeing from the guys who got transferred in and the young guys. There's a lot of question marks in the wide receiver rooms. That's the biggest question mark with Notre Dame. But I think that their defense is going to be one of the 3 best in the country. It's probably going to be Ohio State, them, and a team that and Georgia, obviously. So I think those are probably the 3 most talented defenses in the country. So that's kind of what I'm leaning towards with Notre Dame.
Beef, I'll throw this to you. How big of a game is this for Marcus Freeman?
For Marcus Freeman, I still say it's week 1, still a lot of ball to play, and you're a road underdog here. So I mean, I don't think it's that monumental. I also don't have my finger on the pulse of Notre Dame football week to week like Mark, so I'm not sure. As if Mark, do you say that it's more important? Because I think if they go 11-1, they still make the playoff. If this was last year, it probably is a little bit more important.
So I'll broaden that out for a second. Is the way we view coaches, like let's say Marcus Freeman, James Franklin, Lane Kiffin, who have led their teams into the second tier and the tier below the playoff. Do we change our opinions on these guys now that, like you said, it's a 12-team playoff these guys are fighting to get into, and you can lose 1 or 2 games. It's not advisable. You still want to win every game. They're not going to go into every game and it's like we're going to lose it. But does it change the perception? I think that's a good point. Does it change the perception of these coaches that I don't want to say can't win the big one because Marcus Freeman hasn't been around long enough to say that. But guys in that ilk that get a lot of slack for not getting their team to the upper echelon, does our perception just completely change on what those guys achieve because of the 12-team playoff?
Yeah, Beef and I actually talked about this a lot on my show on Saturday with Sean Bernard, just how different everything's going to be from the way we cover the sport. From, November, there's going to be 24 teams that have important games to play that could, impact the playoff race instead of maybe 6 or 7 the last couple years. And yeah, I think the way coaches are judged is going to change. It's going to be based on who makes the playoffs. And it's going to be really interesting to see who the first guy that gets fired for not being able to win in the playoff is. Like, it's going to be really interesting to see in general. So much about this sport that we love is going to change. And I think most of it's for the good. But the Marcus Freeman thing, I'll just say, I'm lower on Marcus Freeman as the Notre Dame head coach than I think most people. What I would tell you is I think we're still a year away from him being on the hot seat. That's me, my brain thinking. My heart would tell you Notre Dame doesn't make the playoff this year, I'm out. Like if
you're the 13th best team in college football now, it's got consequences.
Yeah, and if you with the same thing with Penn State, same thing with Notre Dame, same thing with these level of teams, if you don't make the playoffs, your season is a failure at Notre Dame at this point. So if they don't make the playoffs this year, that's a 3rd straight year with more than 2 losses probably, because I think they'd get in at 10-2. So they need to win 10 or 11 games in the regular season for the first time in Marcus Freeman's career. And they were so close last year. I mean, they lost 2 games by 1 possession, but they had 10 guys on the field in that last play against Ohio State. Like, I think Marcus Freeman's a really good defensive coordinator. I think it's hard to ignore some of the results that he's gotten out of his defense, and even going back to when he was the defensive coordinator. But there is another level to being a head coach. And same thing I was talking about with Elko, that he was the DC at Texas A&M. I get he was the head coach at Duke, but it's a different thing to be the head coach at a high level, program in these big, huge games. I don't know if Marcus Freeman is that guy. I really don't. I think this year is going to answer a lot of those questions. I wouldn't say this game is necessarily going to change too much. I mean, outside of it impacting their playoff race, but it's just going to come down to if they make the playoff or not.
I heard something today that's one last thing. I heard something today. It was like, just fast forward to the end of the season, the 11 spot, it comes down to Penn State or LSU. Whoever doesn't get in out of that spot, that next day, that fan base wants that coach gone. Like, plain and simple. Like I think you said it best, Mark. Like, who's going to be the first coach fired because he doesn't make the 12-team playoff? And if those programs aren't making the playoff, your season is now deemed a failure. Like, if you thought it was a failure before because you weren't in the top 4, you could kind of brush it off and be like, all right, there's only 4. Now it's 12. Now it's expanded for these kind of programs that are not in that elite echelon, but that second kind of tier. It's going to get messy, I think, too, and I think that kind of adds some extra spice to the season, which will be fun.
I think to wrap it up, because we got to move on to our bets and the rest of the slate. The revenue that comes with hosting a home playoff game is also very important to the university and the boosters. So if you're a Notre Dame, Penn State, Ole Miss, like that, the type of team we're classifying, if you're bringing in an extra, 2 to 3 million for a home playoff game, that also would mean something as well. All right, so let's move on to the Sunday night game, LSU, USC, two teams that a lot of change, hopefully for the good on defense for both teams. Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, obviously gone. What an opener that would have been if it was a year earlier, because both defenses could not play a lick of defense last year. They were guaranteed overs pretty much all season. New defensive coordinators on both sides. I think USC brings back just a little bit more at wide receiver. It's going to be Miller Moss versus Garrett Nussmeier. Neutral site game. LSU 4.5-point favorite. I'm on USC. And look, I think week one, you're still playing a little bit of a guessing game, right, with how these depth charts shake out and who's actually going to be the stars. Zachariah Branch, I think, is the difference maker in this game for USC. He was the electric punt returner, kick returner last year. I think he plays a more elevated role. I just think in terms of difference makers on offense, USC probably has an extra one. And that's kind of where I'm sliding. But this game could go anywhere, guys, especially with who knows what the corrections are on defense. So I'll start there with LSU and USC. You guys can take it whichever way you want. What should we expect on defense? I think offense, we kind of have an idea, but defensively is where the issues have to be fixed.
I'll clear out for beef here because I have nothing on this game. I think USC is the most unpredictable team in the country. I think this game is impossible for me to figure out. Even LSU, I think, is a lot of unpredictability and questions there. USC's obviously a terrible defense, but they hired D'Anthony Lynn from UCLA, who fixed UCLA's defense from terrible to like top 10 in one season. So there's part of me that thinks they'll be terrible on defense again. There's part of me that thinks he's going to be the magic fix to all their problems. I have no idea what to expect in this game. I'll be the judge of who has the better arguments. I think you guys are head to head here.
I'll go favorite bet of the weekend, LSU -4. Lock that in this afternoon. I think it's a statement game. Primetime, national TV. Everyone's going to be, probably wrapping up their Sunday barbecue and turning on this game. Joe, you said one difference maker in Zachariah Branch. I think LSU's got 5 difference makers up front on the offensive line of scrimmage. I think this is the best line in the country. I think they go out there, they push USC around at the line of scrimmage and kind of give them, a little show of what's to come in the future weeks in the Big Ten. I think there's a realistic chance this USC team is 1-3 by the time September ends and the panic button is being hit. I am expecting a lot of points as well, but I think like a fun kind of prop bet would be like first drive touchdown for LSU. I think they just absolutely blow USC off the line of scrimmage. They go right down the field and score and kind of show them what's coming for the rest of the night. So LSU -4. I think they win this game by double digits going away.
Interesting. You can put 11 plus on that?
Like -11?
The alternate spread?
We'll that's a good thing too. Standalone game Sunday night. We got a good day Saturday. We can roll some more over into that.
Or if you have a bad day Saturday.
Yeah,
that's the even scarier proposition. If you have a bad Saturday and Sunday's rolling around and LSU -4.5 is your lock of the week, man, that double digit spread of plus money might look very enticing to you.
Yeah, it could. I also have the USC. That's one of my favorite unders on the year as well. USC under 7.5. So I'm all out on USC this year. I just don't think they have the horses up front to compete with an SEC team week one, let alone the Big Ten the rest of the way.
I think this game's just a massive, like Mark said. I think it's a massive question mark, right? Look,
it could go either way. Like I'm not going to be shocked, but that's just
why they could go 5-7, or they could go 10-2. Like I really do think they have.
I think LSU's got that variance too.
Maybe.
Like the SEC with the way it is. I mean, there's a chance in the SEC and the Big Ten that these teams in 4th to 8th place just get completely run off the field sometimes, and it ends up being kind of a crapshoot on figuring out where they land just in the conference, but also where they land nationally. I think that's going to be fascinating to watch because they are the 2 best conferences, and what if we're talking about maybe a a fourth team from either conference getting in. One team I do know that is probably going to be in the top 3, at least 4 of the Big Ten. And we've got some interesting line movement with this Penn State-West Virginia game, guys. It was a double-digit spread in favor of Penn State for quite some time when lines opened. This thing has been steaming towards West Virginia a lot over the last week. There are a lot of people who think West Virginia is a dangerous dog here. I believe the spread's now 8. Look, I have a very, very simple rule of thumb when it comes to betting on college football and Penn State specifically. If James Franklin is coaching a higher-ranked team against a lower-ranked team, you bet Penn State. If Penn State is playing Ohio State, Michigan, or now Oregon, any of the big boys in the Big Ten, you fade them. It's a classic system that's gotten me through many, many years. He knows the spread because remember at the end of last year's opener against West Virginia, he let the backups just run the ball and score a touchdown to cover the 20-some point spread. Look, I have a system. It's you bet Penn State when they're the favorite, and when they're against a top 10 team, you fade them automatically. I'm not scared of this line movement.
I'm terrified of this game. I'm not touching this game. I'm going to let Beef talk about his pick because this game is just – I agree with everything Tansey said in terms of this is a spot I would normally take Penn State. What if West Virginia's good, though? That's kind of the big question here. And I've heard enough people be high on West Virginia. And I will say, Garrett Green's awesome. Garrett Green is
very good.
Really, really fun.
And they saved Neil Brown's job last year.
So that's the question, I guess, with West Virginia above. I think the questions here are not about Penn State because I think we know what Penn State is. But they're going to be a really good defense. They're going to be able to run the ball. Drew Aller's going to be conservative, but will probably get the job done and get like 220 yards. Like, I think we know what Penn State is. The question is, do we buy that kind of 1-year bump as part of like Neil Brown fixing it and getting it right? Or was it, was that the peak, of them fixing it, I guess? Like, I'm still not really a huge Neil Brown guy, I'd say, but Garrett Green's good enough for me to be afraid enough to not bet this game. I think there's going to be a lot of games I lay the wood with Penn State this year, and I lay the huge spreads, and I bet them as favorites because I think they're going to be favored in 11 games. But I don't think this is one. I'm backing off.
To me, it's a known quantity, right? I know the known quantity of what Penn State is. They have a terrific defense. The offense, who knows? With Kotelnicki coming in, the offensive coordinator from Kansas, will it affect Drew Aller? I think is the biggest question. Yeah, Katron Allen and Nick Singleton are still going to bruise you to death in the middle of the field, and they're going to win a lot of games in the trenches. But I think this is probably a longer term question of can Drew Aller take that next step and make Penn State a top 6 team and get that home playoff game and lock that in and go from there. It's just a known quantity with Penn State for me. West Virginia, I feel like you can make the case for a lot of Big 12 teams this year where you just don't know what's going to happen. I think there's a lot of variance in Big 12, and we'll say that probably for the first month until we find out what these teams actually look like against real competition. I think maybe in the first half they get up for it. I think if you're going to back West Virginia, maybe you back them in the first half. I just don't see it I don't see Penn State laying down in this game, especially with the new stakes of the new Big Ten home playoff game. And I'm sure they're hearing the noise too that West Virginia is getting a decent amount of buzz.
Yeah, I think I was on an afternoon stroll today, and it kind of just hit me like this is reminding me more and more of that Florida State Georgia Tech game last week. I mean, you look at the quarterback, DJU, Drew Aller, it's a bit of an unknown. What version are we going to get of Drew Aller? Is he taking that next leap?
Wait a second, Steve. I got to interrupt you. You were walking, thinking about bets. Would you say that these were walking bets?
Not quite, but those videos are giving me a good laugh these days. But West Virginia brings back, including Garrett Green, 3 750-plus yard rushers from last year. So you look at what Georgia Tech did, that complete kind of ball control game. And I looked at West Virginia ran it for 150 yards on Penn State last year too. So they showed the ability to kind of move the ball. Plus 8.5. I like that. The line movement's very similar as well. Morgantown's all kind of juiced up. I mean, I feel like even in our Big 12 episode that we did this offseason, we didn't really talk about West Virginia that much. This is a 9-win team from last year coming back, good offensive line coming back. It has the makings in my mind of a potential upset, and it would be very Penn State to kind of open up this 12-team playoff season with a loss to an unranked West Virginia game in the first game. So I'm definitely taking that plus 8.5. I took that this afternoon. I think it might get down to maybe even like 7.5 by kickoff. I also think the under could be a play. Bringing in the new offensive coordinator at Penn State, that could be in a bit of an adjustment period as well. So I could see this being like a walk-off field goal, 24-21 type of game.
I could see that too.
The thing for me is I don't know where West Virginia gets to like the 21, 24 points. They moved the ball a decent amount last year against Penn State, but they weren't able to convert on that.
Yeah.
They looked just dangerous enough to be threatening in the first half. And then the second half, I believe that Penn State took that game over. I don't know. I want to believe and it's going to be a close game. I just feel like there's too much of a known quantity for me with what Penn State does, their identity, and I'll counter a little bit there. This isn't the game he loses. He very rarely loses these types of games.
Yeah.
Franklin will lose to whoever top 10 team they play because that's a guarantee as well. I think there's just if I'll say this, if Penn State was going in this with Drew Aller as a first-year starter, I think I'd get on the board with West Virginia, but I think that's where the line gets drawn for me.
I didn't realize Garrett Green had 13 rushing touchdowns and 772 rushing yards. Like he
just only completed 53% of his passes.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, he's definitely inefficient.
But I think that's the big toss-up. All right, so let's go a little bit rapid fire here with week 1. There's a lot to cover in such a short amount of time, but I'm glad we got the big games out of the way because that's really what the casual college football fan is working on in week 1. We'll get to it. You can mention it in the rapid fire.
Big game.
We can't go an hour and a half.
That's
So with these games, I guess I'll leave it an open floor for you guys. What are you looking at in terms of betting in week 1? If you want to hit the Miami, Florida game, you can. But what stands out to you on the betting board? A lot of FCS versus FBS, a lot of Group of 5 versus Power 5. How do you navigate week 1?
One of the things that I really looked at was teams kind of in look-ahead spots for next week. I mean, so 2 games that I had circled are Colorado State plus 32.5. They're playing Texas. Texas plays Michigan next week. Michigan this week plays Fresno State. I like Fresno State plus 21.5. I think both those teams try to be vanilla heading into that big game. That's, I think, one of the 2 or 3 biggest non-conference games of the entire season. So I think that's certainly something to look at in week 1. Kind of take a peek at these teams' opponents in week 2 as well. If they might be like hiding some of their game plan, keeping it vanilla. And week 1's kind of just such a crapshoot, especially now, how much roster continuity you have or lack thereof. Like there's so many changing parts. We could be completely wrong on half these teams and what they look like, what their game plan is. So that's kind of the angle that I'm trying to take here in week 1 and 2 of the teams I had circled.
I'm on Hawaii. We talked about this a few weeks ago. I'm taking them outright. I'm not a believer in UCLA. I think the loss of DeAnton Lynn, the defensive coordinator to USC, is a big deal. And you have a first-year head coach in Deshaun Foster taking over, going to Hawaii. It's a tough trip in general. Hawaii's already have a game under their belt. I'm just not that big of a believer in UCLA. So I'm going to stick my nose out in the line here. And it's a national TV game, too. Hawaii doesn't get that many of those. It's a CBS primetime game. This is not – we're usually watching Hawaii on pay-per-view at 12 o'clock at night, chasing the rest of our bets. I'm going to take Hawaii plus the 14 and outright.
I like it. I think UCLA is going to be one of the worst Power 4 teams. By the way, Power 4. I'm not used to it yet. But I think they're truly going to be one of the 5 to 10 worst Power 4 teams in the country. So I'm right there with you. I like that pick, and I'm going to go a different way here. You know what? I'll stay on the same theme, kind of. I'll fade another one of those worst Power 5 or Power 4 teams in the country. Give me Virginia Tech minus 12.5 at Vanderbilt.
Mm-hmm.
It's Beef's Hokies, so I'm holding him responsible.
That line is too obvious.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. I try to, you know me, I try to avoid that stuff, and I try to just, set just to let people in on it. I set my own lines, and then I look at the line, and then I look at the gap, and I'm like, that's how I decide my favorite bets. So I have a little bit of a psychotic process. I try to avoid the rat poison of line movement and stuff like that, or thinking about rat lines. But Virginia Tech minus 12.5, I think is just, I get that there's some people like pump the brakes in Virginia Tech. They went 6-6 last year, and maybe they finished with a pretty easy schedule. I just believe in Kyron Drones. I think Drones is going to the level. I don't think I would put him in the top 15 conversation now because he hasn't played enough. But I think once he plays, I think that guy's absolutely electric.
There's a strategy to follow. It's called keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
Virginia Tech.
Oh, yeah.
Vanderbilt, not good. Never has been good. Like Virginia Tech has better talent. Like, just don't overthink it. We do this so many times in college football. Just don't overthink it. Keep it simple, stupid. The Hokies.
How many starters are Virginia Tech bringing it back? Isn't it like 18 starters? Yeah. I was reading. Like, you basically have the New Mexico State team for Vanderbilt. Like they brought in their head coach as an offensive analyst. That's Diego Pavia as their quarterback. They brought in like 7 guys from that team who were expected to play roles. Like, I don't know about you, but I don't think like New Mexico State is going to play in the SEC. So not that this.
In fact, they're typically usually a cupcake opponent.
Yeah, I think Virginia Tech is going to absolutely smoke them. The one thing that makes you nervous is Virginia Tech's not the same team away from home, but they haven't even been home yet this year, so we don't even know what they are. I think they're going to be just so much better than Vanderbilt. One more I wanted to throw at you guys, because this is kind of like an interesting one. South Dakota State is a dynasty in the D2. Last year, I think they outscored their playoff opponents by like 100 points or something crazy. They won the championship 23-3, but they lost more than half of their starters last year, and you have an Oklahoma State team that's returning 18 starters, could potentially be a playoff team, and has a really good chance to win the Big 12, in my opinion. They have the best running back in the country. They return a quarterback who I don't think he's great, but he had 3,500 yards, and he's really experienced.
They have Perry Ellis at quarterback.
Yeah, they do. Get a job. Like, definitely, he's like the get a job all-star. Oklahoma State also returns their top 2 receivers and their entire secondary, as well as most of their defensive line. Like, I just think they return so much at so many key spots. I think they're on a different level than South Dakota State. And I know that didn't Oklahoma State lose a weird one early last year. I think a lot of people were South Alabama. Yeah, I think a lot of people were pointing to that.
The thing is, we talked about coaches with tendencies. This is a head coach with a lot of tendencies to lose this type of game in Mike Gundy.
I know.
That's why, and I think I said this at the beginning of the summer, that I like South Dakota State. The more I look at it, I like the pokes in this one. But I can't put the trigger on the bet because this is Mike Gundy. They're either going to win by 30 or they're going to win the game on a field goal in the fourth quarter. That's just how the law of Gundy works, which is kind of an ambiguous law because he doesn't follow many. But but I think it's a fascinating game, I think. But the returning production, I think, is so huge for Oklahoma State that maybe the Gundy loss will happen. But when it does, we'll see what happens.
2 o'clock start time, weird start time there. It's going to be all like the third quarter of the noon slate. It's like, oh wait, turn on Oklahoma State. That's
exactly what they want. They want to bury that game to make sure if they win, you look at the score at like 6 o'clock. Oh, they won. And if they're losing or they're tied, you have to like struggle to find the game. All right, let's wrap up here. We're running short on time. 30 seconds. A game we did not hit on in week 1 that has your interest, whether it's betting or college football, just in general. Beef, I'll start with you.
I'm going to go Friday night betting angle here. I'm going with Oklahoma. They're hosting Temple. Oklahoma minus 43. Steve Mackin from VSiN tweeted this out yesterday. Huge favorites, which he qualifies as a favorite over 37.5, are automatic in FBS games since 2013. They are 14-0 straight up and against the spread. I think Oklahoma just blows Temple off the ball every play. If Oklahoma wanted to, they could probably win that game, like Oregon did last year against Portland State, which I believe was 81-7. So I don't know if it'll be that much, but I think it could be like a 56-7 type game. Oklahoma Friday night, -43. Get a little bankroll builder as you head into Saturday afternoon.
Mark, you're off the radar game for week 1.
I'm also going Friday night, and I'll look at TCU Stanford. I like TCU -9 in this spot in a road game here to start off the year. New defensive coordinator for TCU, which I think is going to be big. Their defense was a disaster last year because their offense didn't really fall off a cliff. I know that their offense wasn't quite as good as it was with Max Duggan and Quentin Johnston, but Josh Hoover was pretty darn good down the stretch. I actually like his over 273.5 pass yards. He has his top 2 receivers back. They got a transfer tight end who's getting NFL buzz and Drake Dabney. After being named the starting quarterback last year, he was over this line in 5 of 6 starts, threw for 300 yards in his last 5 starts and 350 plus in 4 of his last 5 starts. So I think this is a guy who's not getting talked about. There's a chance TCU gets kind of back on track and wins 8-9 games. They're a team that no one's talking about despite them being in the championship 2 years ago. And I don't know if they should be talking about them, but Stanford's one of those other teams that might be one of the worst teams in the Power 4. And I think is going to be the worst team in the ACC this season. So give me TCU -9. I think they lay the smackdown.
My hand is right in the trap. It's week 1, and I have fallen face first, ass backwards into the betting trap. I'm betting the Iowa Hawkeyes -22.5 against Illinois State. Look, it can't get any worse than last year, right? Right?
Yeah, I have that.
Maybe?
That's on my card too.
Maybe?
I like it. And Ferentz isn't coaching, so maybe they say screw it and throw the ball around the yard a little bit.
Maybe that's what ends up working. But there's absolutely no way that I'm not taking a mid to potentially, let's say, second tier, top tier Big Ten team against Illinois State, no matter how good they are. Iowa's going to defense them to death, and hell, they got to be able to score 24 points against an FCS team. If not, I'll check back later. But look, I'm going right back into bad habits with the Hawkeyes.
We just have to mention Miami, Florida. I didn't bring it up as my one game. I like Miami. Beef has Miami going undefeated this year, so I bet Beef is in.
That's
here.
over on Saturday for
Yeah.
sure.
And I understand this is such like a trap spot, and everyone's like, "Oh, hard to win in the swamp," and don't count out Florida. Graham Mertz pretty good. I'm sorry. I'm counting them out. This is not the game that Mario Cristobal loses. Mario Cristobal loses at Georgia Tech or at Syracuse. He
does.
He doesn't lose the big game to start off the year. He'll get the buzz.
He's a South Beach Mike Gundy.
Yeah, no, that's kind of fair. I'm not a Cristobal guy, but I think he gets the job done here. I think Miami's just a far better roster outside of quarterback than Florida. And even if you wanted to get into Cam Ward versus Graham Mertz, I'll take Cam Ward. But give me Cristobal over Napier all day long, even if I am worried that I'm banking on Cristobal.
Yeah, that worries me. So I'm staying away from this.
It's fair
for sure.
Fair.
Yeah. Beef is Mr. U this year.
Well, with all those futures I have on them, I might be able to buy some real estate in South Beach. So
it's true. So thank you everyone for tuning in to our week 1 preview. We'll be back here every Tuesday night to preview the college football betting board, the Three Stooges here without Sean Brace, which may make it more interesting or less interesting. We'll find out throughout the year. For Ryan Beef Coyle, Mark Henry Jr., I am Joe Tansey. Thank you for listening, and best of luck on all of your plays this week to open up the college football season.